The Arizona sun did not shine so much as it struck, a heavy, relentless hammer beating against the anvil of the earth. It was late in the summer of 1878, and the heat rose in shimmering waves off the red dust, distorting the shapes of the distant Dragoon Mountains until they looked like sleeping giants about to crumble. Luke Carver shifted in his saddle, squinting against the glare. He rode a roan gelding that had seen better years, a beast as scarred and trail-weary as the man upon its back. Luke pulled his hat brim lower, his blue eyes scanning the horizon not for beauty, but for threats. He was a scout, a tracker, a man paid to see what others missed, and right now, what he saw was a landscape that did not want them there. Behind him stretched a column of 6 wagons, their canvas covers bleached bone-white by the journey. They creaked and groaned over the uneven ground, kicking up clouds of alkali dust that coated the throats of the mules and the men alike. This was the entourage of Henry Caldwell, the newly appointed Indian agent for the San Carlos region, and in Luke's estimation, the man was as out of place here as a silk suit in a hog pen. Caldwell rode up beside Luke on a mare that was too fine-boned for this rough country. The agent was a man of middle years, dressed in a suit that might have impressed the politicians back in Washington, but only served to make him sweat profusely in the territory. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his forehead. His face flushed a blotchy red. "How much farther to the agency?" "Mr. Carver," Caldwell asked, his voice thin and irritated. "You said we would arrive by noon. It feels past 1 o'clock. Luke did not look at him. He kept his eyes on a ridge to the north. "The land does not care about your schedule. Mr. Caldwell, we will get there when the horses get there. Another hour, likely, unless a wheel breaks." "You are a pessimist, Carver," Caldwell muttered, stuffing the handkerchief away. "I am here to bring civilization, order, and Christian charity to these savages. A little optimism would not go amiss." Luke chewed on the inside of his cheek. He had watched the loading of these wagons back at the railhead. He had seen the barrels of flour that sat too lightly when the teamsters lifted them, and the crates of beef that had been pried open and nailed shut again with different seals. He knew the weight of a full barrel, and he knew the weight of a half-empty one. Caldwell was bringing civilization, perhaps, but he was leaving the charity behind and pocketing the difference. "I am not paid for optimism," Luke said, his voice a low gravel rasp. "I am paid to make sure you do not get an arrow in your neck before you can sign your papers. That is it." Caldwell huffed and dropped back to yell at a driver. Luke urged his horse forward, but his gaze drifted toward the purple shadows of the mountains. His gut tightened, a familiar, cold sensation that had nothing to do with the heat. He hated this part of the country. It smelled of sage and old blood. By the time the adobe walls of the fort and the adjacent agency buildings came into view, the sun had begun its slow descent. The new agency was a stark collection of mud brick structures sitting uneasily on the edge of the reservation. Soldiers from the cavalry detachment were already there, patrolling the perimeter, their blue coats dusty and dark with sweat. Major Silas Crook rode out to meet them. The major was a man carved from gristle and spite, with a mustache that hid a mouth perpetually turned downward. He saluted Caldwell, but ignored Luke entirely. To men like Crook, a scout who drifted between worlds was barely better than the Apache they were meant to control. "Welcome to hell, Agent Caldwell," Crook said, his voice booming. "Though I suppose you are here to tell us how to turn it into a garden." "I am here to do my duty." "Major," Caldwell said, dismounting stiffly, "and to meet with the leadership. Is Chief Nantan here?" "He is." Crook spat on the ground. "Waiting by the corral. Brought half his band with him. They are hungry. And when they are hungry, they get agitated." Luke dismounted, loosening the cinch on his saddle to let his horse breathe. He intended to collect his pay and ride out before sunset. He wanted no part of the politics, no part of the lies, but as he turned to lead his horse to the water trough, he saw them. A group of Apaches stood near the agency porch. They were still, watchful, like hawks perched on a fence line. In the center stood an old man with skin like cracked leather and eyes that held a profound, weary sadness. That was Chief Nantan. But it was the woman standing at his right hand who made Luke stop in his tracks. She was young, perhaps 20 years of age. She wore a dress of soft buckskin, bleached almost white and intricate with beadwork in patterns of blue and yellow. Her hair was black as a raven's wing, parted severe and straight, falling down her back in a heavy braid. But it was her posture that struck Luke like a physical blow. She did not slump. She did not look at the ground, as many of the reservation Indians had learned to do to avoid provoking the soldiers. Her chin was lifted, her dark eyes sweeping over the arriving wagons with a cold, assessing intelligence. This was Ayanna. Caldwell dusted off his suit and approached the group, forcing a jovial smile that did not reach his eyes. "Chief Nantan," he said loudly, extending a hand that the old chief did not take. "I am Agent Caldwell. I bring greetings from the Great Father in Washington." Nantan looked at the man, then turned slightly to his daughter. He spoke in his own tongue, a fluid, rhythmic sound that seemed to blend with the wind. Ayanna stepped forward. Her voice, when she spoke English, was startlingly clear, devoid of the hesitation Luke expected. It was a voice of iron wrapped in velvet. "My father says greetings are wind," Ayanna translated, looking directly at Caldwell. "He asks where the beef is. The winter rations were promised 3 moons ago. Our children are eating boiled bark and lizards." Caldwell's smile faltered. "Now, see here. Tell your father that logistics are difficult. The supply lines are long. We have brought flour, and we have brought blankets." Ayanna did not translate immediately. She looked at the wagons Luke had brought in, her gaze locked on the crates. "Flour that moves with the sound of sand?" she asked. "And beef that smells of rot before the barrel is opened. We know what the other agents brought. Do you bring the same?" Luke leaned against a hitching post, tipping his hat back. She was sharp, dangerously sharp. Major Crook stepped in, his hand resting on the hilt of his saber. "Watch your tone, girl. You are speaking to a representative of the government." Ayanna turned her gaze to Crook. She did not flinch. "I am speaking for people who are starving. Major, respect is fed with truth, not empty bellies." Luke felt a reluctant smile tug at the corner of his mouth. She had a fire. Most people around Crook wilted, but she stood like a pine tree in a gale. "Tell him," Caldwell interrupted, trying to regain control, "that we will conduct a full inventory tomorrow, but he must control his young men. We have reports of braves leaving the reservation boundaries. That is a violation of the treaty." Nantan spoke again, his voice rougher this time. Ayanna translated. "He says young men cannot sit still when they watch their mothers weep from hunger. If you cage a wolf and do not feed it, do not blame the wolf when it bites the bars." The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The soldiers around the perimeter tightened their grips on their carbines. The Apache warriors behind Nantan shifted, their hands hovering near the knives at their waists. Suddenly, the wind changed. It happened in a heartbeat. The hot breeze that had been blowing from the west died instantly, replaced by a strange, sucking vacuum. The horses in the corral pinned their ears back and screamed. Luke looked up. A wall of brown darkness, thousands of feet high, was racing across the desert floor toward them. "Sandstorm!" Luke roared. "Get the horses inside. Cover your faces." Chaos erupted. The orderly meeting dissolved as men scrambled to secure the canvas covers of the wagons and drag animals toward the shelter of the barn. The sky turned a bruised purple, then black, as the sun was blotted out. Luke grabbed the bridle of his gelding, pulling his bandana up over his nose. Through the rising gale, he saw Ayanna struggling. She was holding the lead rope of a frightened pinto colt that was rearing and striking out with its hooves. The animal was terrified, its eyes rolling white, threatening to trample her. Without thinking, Luke let go of his own horse. It was trained to stand and lunged forward. He grabbed the colt's halter with one hand, using his weight to drag the beast's head down. "Easy," Luke shouted over the roar of the wind. "Easy, son." He moved with the animal, not fighting its strength but redirecting it, murmuring low, soothing sounds that were lost in the howling wind but felt in the vibration of his chest against the horse's neck. The colt shuddered and stood still, trembling. Ayanna was pressed against the corral fence, breathing hard. Her hair had whipped loose from its braid, lashing across her face. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, mere inches from his own. The world around them was reduced to swirling grit and the smell of ozone. For a moment, they were just two people trapped in the fury of the earth. "You have a steady hand," she shouted to be heard. "Horses make more sense than people," Luke shouted back. He shielded his eyes, looking down at her. Up close, she was beautiful in a fierce, terrifying way. "You are the scout," she said, her statement an accusation and a question all at once. "You brought him here, the liar in the fine suit." "I brought the wagons," Luke corrected. "What he does with them is his business." "It is our business if we starve," she snapped. She wiped dust from her eyes. "What kind of white man are you? The kind who hates us, or the kind who pities us?" Luke looked at her, the grit stinging his skin. He thought of the empty whiskey bottles in his saddlebag and the nightmares that waited for him every time he closed his eyes. "Neither," Luke said, his voice flat. "I am the kind trying to live, and trying not to kill anyone else while I do it." She stared at him, searching his face as if looking for a lie. Before she could answer, the storm intensified, forcing them to duck into the shelter of the nearby stable. That night, the wind died down as quickly as it had risen, leaving the fort blanketed in a layer of fine red dust. The moon rose, casting long, skeletal shadows across the parade grounds. Luke sat alone on a crate outside the stables, a hand-rolled cigarette burning between his fingers. He had not gone to the barracks to sleep with the soldiers, and he certainly wasn't welcome in the officers' quarters. He preferred the company of the horses. He took a drag of the tobacco, the smoke harsh in his lungs. His hand trembled slightly, a tremor that had started 5 years ago and never quite left. He squeezed his fist tight to stop it. The meeting today had rattled him. Not Caldwell's corruption that was as common as cactus thorns. It was the girl, Ayanna, and the way she looked at the mountains. It brought the memory back, unbidden and violent. 5 years ago, a different valley, deeper in the territory. He had been an army scout then, young and believing in the nobility of the uniform. He had found the tracks. He had reported back to the lieutenant that he had found a camp. He thought it was the renegades they'd been chasing for weeks. He led them in at dawn, but when the shooting started, there was no return fire, no war cries, just screaming. He rode through the smoke, shouting for the lieutenant to stop, but the bloodlust was up. He saw a woman running, a baby in her arms. He saw a trooper raise his carbine. Luke had tackled the trooper, but he was 1 man against 100. When the smoke cleared, there were no warriors, just old men, women, and children. He had washed his hands in the creek for an hour, but the red never seemed to come off. Luke dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot heel. He exhaled a long breath. He needed to leave this place. Tomorrow, he will take his pay and ride west. California, maybe. Somewhere the ocean could drown out the noise in his head. Meanwhile, a mile away in the temporary camp the Apache had set up near the river, the mood was equally dark. A small fire burned in the center of the council circle. Nantan sat wrapped in a blanket, his face drawn. Across from him paced Kohana, a young warrior with shoulders like boulders and a scar running through his left eyebrow. Kohana was strong, brave, and reckless, everything Nantan had been in his youth, and everything he feared now. "The fat man lies," Kohana spat, pacing like a caged panther. "I saw his eyes. He speaks of flower, but his eyes speak of graves. We should not have come here. We should be in the mountains." "And eat stones?" Nantan asked, his voice rasping. "The soldiers guard the waterholes in the mountains now. Kohana, we have no ammunition to fight a war. Better to die fighting than to die with an empty belly waiting for a white man's paper," Kohana shouted. He turned to Ayanna, who sat quietly by the fire, mending a tear in her dress. "You heard him. Ayanna, you speak their tongue. Did he sound like a man of honor?" Ayanna did not look up immediately. "He sounds like a snake," she admitted. "But Major Crook is a bear. If the snake bites, we hurt. If the bear strikes, we die. We must be cleverer than both." Kohana knelt beside her, his voice dropping, becoming urgent. "Marry me, Ayanna. Let me speak to your father. If we unite the clans, the young men will listen to me. We can strike the wagon train tonight, take the food that is ours, and disappear into the canyons before the bluecoats wake up." Ayanna looked at him. She cared for Kohana. He was of her blood, and he would die for her. But he saw the world only in terms of the hunt and the kill. He did not understand the webs that were being spun around them. "If we steal the wagons, they will send 1,000 soldiers," Ayanna said softly. "They will hunt us until the last child is gone. I will not marry you to start a war. Kohana, I will marry when I find a path to peace." Kohana stood up, angry and hurt. "Peace is a dream of the old. Survival is the reality." He stormed off into the darkness. Ayanna sighed and leaned back against a log. Her mind drifted away from Kohana, away from her father's coughing, and back to the stable. The scout, the man with the sad eyes and the gentle hands on the frightened horse. She frowned, puzzling over a sensation that had been nagging at her all afternoon. When the storm had cleared and she had seen him clearly in the fading light, something had stirred in the deep waters of her memory. She closed her eyes, trying to grasp the image. She was 12 years old again. The morning of the fire, the air filled with smoke and screams. She was hiding under a fallen wagon, terrified. Through the gap in the wood, she saw the legs of horses. She saw soldiers shooting. But she remembered one man, a man on a gray horse, not the same horse as today, but gray nonetheless. He was not shooting. He was screaming at the other soldiers, his face twisted in horror. He had ridden between a soldier and a fleeing woman, knocking the soldier's gun aside. She remembered the way he sat in the saddle. She remembered the specific, odd way he held his reins, high in the left hand, and she remembered a small, distinct detail. As he had wrestled the horse around, his sleeve had ridden up. Ayanna's eyes snapped open in the present darkness. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. The scout at the stable today, when he had grabbed the colt, his sleeve had pulled back. She had seen the same thing. Not a tattoo, but a jagged, white scar shaped like a lightning bolt running up the inside of his forearm. It was him. The man who had helped her with the horse today was the same man who had led the soldiers to her mother's village. He was not just a stranger. He was the ghost of the valley. Ayanna stood up slowly, her breath trembling. The man she had felt a strange, magnetic pull toward was the monster from her nightmares. She looked toward the lights of the fort in the distance. Fate had brought him back to her. But was he here to save them this time? Or was he here to finish the job? Ayanna clenched her fists at her sides. She did not know. But she swore by the spirits of her ancestors that she would find out. If he was an enemy, she would not hesitate to put an arrow through his heart, no matter how gentle his hands were. The air in Henry Caldwell's office was thick enough to chew. It smelled of stale cigar smoke, cheap whiskey, and the cloying scent of bay rum that the agent wore to mask the odor of his own sweat. Outside, the Arizona night was cooling down, but here, the heat of ambition burned hot. Caldwell sat behind his desk, his fingers steepled. Opposite him sat Major Silas Crook, cleaning his fingernails with a Bowie knife, and a man who looked like he had been dragged backward through a mesquite patch. This was Red Jack Mercer, a gun for hire with teeth stained yellow by tobacco and a reputation that made decent folk cross the street. "The railroad board is impatient," Caldwell said, his voice low and smooth. "They have surveyors waiting in Tucson. They cannot lay track through a valley infested with hostiles. And they certainly will not pay premium prices for land that is technically a reservation." Red Jack grinned, a flash of gold and rot. "Then we make it not a reservation. We make it a war zone." Major Crook looked up from his nails. "Washington requires a provocation. Caldwell, I cannot simply march a regiment into Nantan's village and start shooting. The press back east has become sentimental about the noble savage lately. I need a reason. A bloody reason." Caldwell opened a drawer and pulled out a bottle of brandy. He poured 3 glasses. That is why Mercer is here. Tonight, the peace treaty becomes nothing more than kindling. He slid a glass toward the outlaw. You know what to do? Mercer downed the drink in one gulp and wiped his mouth with a dirty sleeve. Miller's ranch is 10 miles out, isolated. Miller has a loud mouth, hates Indians. Nobody will be surprised if he gets scalped. Make it convincing, Crook ordered, his eyes gleaming with a cold, predatory light. I want arrows. I want war paint. I want it to look like the Apache have risen from hell itself. Don't worry, Major, Mercer laughed, standing up. By sunrise, you will have your war, and Mr. Caldwell will have his railroad land. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when the alarm was raised. A rider, bloodied and frantic, galloped into the fort screaming that the Miller ranch was burning. Luke Carver was already awake, drinking bitter coffee by the corral. When the order came to saddle up, Major Crook wanted a scouting party immediately. Luke threw his saddle onto the roan gelding, his gut twisting. He had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by the eyes of the girl, Ayanna, and the ghosts of his past. Now, the morning air smelled of impending violence. They rode hard. Caldwell insisted on coming along, bouncing uncomfortably in a light buggy, flanked by Crook's cavalry. When they crested the rise overlooking Miller's homestead, Luke pulled his horse to a halt. It was a slaughterhouse. The main house was a smoldering ruin. The timber frame collapsed into a pile of black ash. The barn was still standing, but the door hung off its hinges. In the dirt yard lay the bodies of John Miller and his 2 hands. They were riddled with arrows. Major Crook rode forward, his face a mask of righteous fury. Savages, he spat. Animals! Look at this! They did not just kill them, they butchered them. Luke dismounted and walked toward the bodies. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning the ground. He knelt beside Miller's corpse. There were 3 arrows protruding from the man's chest. Luke reached out and touched the fletching of one arrow. He frowned. Well, Carver, Caldwell called out from his buggy, holding a handkerchief to his nose. Tell us what happened. Tell us who did this. Luke did not answer immediately. He pulled the arrow free with a wet sucking sound and held it up to the light. The shaft was straight, machine-lathed pine, not the hand-smoothed willow shoots the Apache used. The feathers were turkey, yes, but they were tied with red cotton thread. Apache used deer sinew, and they did not waste arrows on dead men. Luke stood and walked toward the corral where the horses had been stolen. He studied the tracks in the soft earth. There were hoofprints everywhere, overlapping and chaotic. He traced the outline of a print with his finger. It was deep and clear. The horse that made this track was wearing iron shoes. The Apache in Nantan's band rode unshod ponies. Their hooves were hard as rock, but they left a different mark, smaller, rounder, and without the distinct rim of a blacksmith's work. These tracks belonged to cavalry mounts or ranch horses, or horses ridden by white men pretending to be something else. Luke stood up, dusting his hands on his trousers. He walked over to where Crook and Caldwell were conferring. It was a raiding party, Crook was saying loudly, ensuring the nearby troopers could hear. Nantan's young bucks. They got tired of waiting for beef, so they came for Miller's stock. It was not Apache, Luke said. The conversation stopped. Crook turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. What did you say, scout? Luke held up the arrow. This fletching is tied with store-bought thread. The shaft is milled lumber, and the tracks over yonder shod horses. Nantan's ponies do not wear iron. Caldwell climbed down from his buggy. He walked up to Luke, his face hard. He snatched the arrow from Luke's hand and snapped it in 2. You are mistaken, Mr. Carver, Caldwell said softly, his voice dropping so only Luke could hear. The heat is playing tricks on your eyes. My eyes are fine, Luke replied, his voice steady but low. This was staged. Someone wanted it to look like a war party. Caldwell stepped closer, invading Luke's personal space. You are paid to lead us to the trail we tell you to find. Carver, you are not paid to think. You are not paid to investigate. You are a guide. Do you understand? Luke looked at the broken arrow in the dust, then at Caldwell's polished boots. He looked up at Crook, who was watching him with a hand resting on his pistol. "I understand," Luke said. "I understand perfectly." "Good," Crook boomed. Turning back to his men, "Sergeant, gather the evidence. We return to the fort. I will draft a declaration. We rode to Nantan's village at dawn. We will teach these murderers a lesson they will never forget." Luke swung back into his saddle. He felt dirty, dirtier than he had felt in years. He looked at the bodies of the ranchers. They were dead, killed by white men to justify killing red men. It was a circle of blood, and he was standing right in the center of it. By the time they returned to the agency, the sun was high and brutal. The news of the massacre had traveled faster than the horses. The fort was buzzing with anger. Soldiers were sharpening bayonets. Women in the laundry sheds were whispering fearfully about the uprising. Ayanna was at the trade store near the agency gates. She had come to trade woven baskets for sugar, hoping to bring something sweet back to the children who were crying from hunger. She heard the commotion and stepped out onto the porch. She saw Major Crook standing on a crate in the parade ground, addressing a gathering of soldiers and settlers. "We have proof," Crook shouted, waving a handful of the fake arrows. "Nantan talks of peace while his warriors slaughter our neighbors in their sleep. There can be no more mercy. Tomorrow, we will go to the valley. We will burn out the rot. We will bring law to this territory, even if we have to write it in their blood." The crowd cheered. Ayanna felt the blood drain from her face. She dropped her basket. The woven reeds unraveled, spilling across the wooden planks. It was a lie. She knew Kohana and the young men had been in the camp last night, arguing around the fire. No one had left. She turned to run, to find her horse and race back to her father. But she stopped. She saw Luke Carver. He was leading his horse toward the stables, his head bowed. He looked like a man walking to his own hanging. Ayanna moved before she thought. She marched across the dusty ground, ignoring the jeers of a few soldiers who saw her. She intercepted Luke at the stable door. "You!" she hissed. Luke stopped and looked up. His face was gray with dust and fatigue. When he saw her, he flinched. "Ayanna," he said, "you should not be here. It is not safe." "Safe," she laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "You call this safety? I heard the major. He says my people killed the rancher. You were there, scout. You saw the tracks. Did you tell them the truth? Or did you sell your eyes for their silver?" Luke uncinched his saddle and pulled it off the horse, setting it on the rail with a heavy thud. He began to brush the horse down, refusing to look at her. "I told them," Luke said quietly. "They did not listen. They did not want to hear it." "So you will lead them." Ayanna stepped closer, her anger vibrating in the air between them. "Tomorrow, when they come to burn our tents and shoot our babies, you will be at the front, showing them the way." Just like a good dog, Luke stopped brushing. He gripped the horse's mane. "I am just a man trying to survive. Ayanna, I have no power here." "You have a voice," she cried. She reached out and grabbed his arm, trying to force him to turn and face her. Look at me and tell me you will do this." Luke turned. He pulled his arm away. But in the struggle, his shirt sleeve caught on the buckle of the bridle. The fabric tore, and the sleeve rode up his forearm. The afternoon sun hit his skin. There, running from the inside of his wrist up toward his elbow, was a jagged white scar. It looked like a bolt of lightning, or a river on a map. Ayanna froze. The world stopped spinning. The sounds of the fort, the blacksmith's hammer, the shouting soldiers, the barking dogs faded into a buzzing silence. She was 12 years old again. The smoke was stinging her eyes. She was under the wagon. The man on the gray horse was wrestling his mount, screaming at the soldiers to stop. His sleeve was torn. The scar was there, fresh and red then, bleeding. She looked from the scar to Luke's face, the blue eyes, the line of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders. It was him. She released his arm as if it were a burning coal. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. "It is you," she whispered. Her voice broke. "The ghost of the valley." Luke looked down at his arm, then at her. He saw the recognition in her eyes. He saw the horror. He did not try to hide it. He slowly rolled the sleeve down. "Ayanna," he started, his voice rough. "Do not speak my name," she gasped. Tears of rage and betrayal welled in her eyes. I thought you were different. I thought I saw a man. But you're just the same monster wearing a new face." "I tried to stop it," Luke said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "That day, I did not know." "You led them there," she accused, her voice trembling with the force of her grief. "My mother died with a bullet in her back because you found the trail, and now you are here to do it again. You are the shadow of death. Luke Carver." She looked at him with a mixture of hatred and a terrible, breaking sorrow, because for a moment, in the storm yesterday, she had felt safe with him, and that terrified her more than the soldiers. "Go," she whispered. "Lead them, but know this. When you come to our village tomorrow, I will not be the girl hiding under a wagon. I will be the one holding the rifle, and I will not miss it." She turned and ran. She ran past the soldiers, past the staring settlers, scrambling onto her pony and kicking it into a gallop toward the hills. Luke watched her go. He stood there for a long time, the brush in his hand, while the sun sank lower and turned the sky the color of a fresh bruise. Night fell over the fort, heavy and suffocating. The soldiers were celebrating in the barracks, drinking to tomorrow's victory. The officers were dining in the mess hall. Luke sat in his small room at the back of the livery stable. A bottle of whiskey sat on the table in front of him. It was unopened. He stared at the amber liquid. He could drink it. He could drink it until the world went soft and blurry, until the face of the girl and the memory of the massacre faded away. He could pack his saddlebags and ride west tonight. He had his pay. He could be in California in 2 weeks. He could leave this godforsaken territory and its blood feuds behind. That was what a smart man would do. That was what a survivor would do. He looked at his arm, tracing the scar through the fabric of his shirt. "I tried to stop it," he had told her. But trying counted for nothing when the graves were dug. He thought of the fake arrows. He thought of Caldwell's smug face. He thought of the children in Nantan's village, skinny, hungry, waiting for a dawn that would bring fire. If he left, they died. If he stayed and did nothing, they died. Luke stood up. He grabbed the whiskey bottle and walked to the door. He opened it and poured the contents out onto the dry earth. The alcohol evaporated quickly in the desert air. He went back inside and packed his gear. He took his rifle, his Colt revolver, and every box of ammunition he had. He filled 2 canteens. He rolled his bedroll tight. He moved quietly to the corral. The roan gelding nickered softly, sensing the tension in his master. Luke saddled him in the dark, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He led the horse out the back gate of the fort, slipping past the sleeping sentries who were too drunk on the promise of war to keep a proper watch. Once he was clear of the lights, Luke mounted up. He looked west, toward the freedom of the open trail. Then he turned his horse's head north, toward the jagged silhouette of the Dragoon Mountains, toward the Apache stronghold. He was crossing the line. By doing this, he was deserting his post. He was aiding the enemy. If Crook caught him, he would hang. If the Apache caught him, they might kill him slowly before he could speak. He was riding into a trap on both sides. He was a traitor to his race and a monster to the people he was trying to save. Luke spurred the horse into a lope. The wind rushed past his face, cooling the sweat on his brow. "I am not doing this for you, Ayanna," he muttered to the darkness, though he knew it was a lie. "I am doing this because I am tired of seeing the wrong people die." He rode into the black mouth of the desert, a single man against an army, racing to beat the sunrise. The war had begun, and Luke Carver had just chosen the losing side. The moon hung low and heavy over the Dragoon Mountains, painting the jagged peaks in shades of silver and bruised purple. Luke Carver urged his roan gelding up the final, treacherous switchback of the trail. The horse was blowing hard, its coat slick with sweat that turned cold in the night air. Luke was not in much better shape. His shoulder throbbed where a branch had whipped him hours ago. His eyes burned from the dust and the lack of sleep. He knew he was riding into the jaws of a wolf trap. The Apache camp was not sleeping. As Luke crested the ridge, he saw the flicker of fires down in the bowl of the canyon. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat drifted up, mixed with the sharp tang of pine. He did not try to hide. To hide was to act like a predator, and predators were killed on sight. He rode openly, his hands held high, reins loose on the horse's neck. The warning came as the whistle of an arrow slicing the air inches from his ear. "Stop!" A voice shouted from the darkness, guttural and thick with anger. Luke pulled the horse up. Before the animal's hooves had settled, shadows detached themselves from the rocks. 3 men, then 5, then a dozen. They moved with the terrifying silence of ghosts. A hand grabbed Luke's ankle and yanked. He did not fight it. He tumbled from the saddle, hitting the hard earth with a grunt. Air left his lungs. Before he could draw a breath, a knee was pressed into his chest, and the cold edge of a knife was against his throat. Luke looked up into the face of Kohana. The young warrior's eyes were wild, reflecting the moonlight like obsidian. War paint black and white stripes marred his cheeks. "Blue coat dog," Kohana hissed in English. "You come to count us before the bullets fly. I should cut your throat and leave you for the buzzards." "I am alone," Luke wheezed, keeping his hands spread flat on the dirt. "I came to talk. Talk is for the living." Kohana pressed the knife harder. A thin line of blood appeared on Luke's neck. "You are already dead." "Let him up, Kohana." The voice cut through the tension like a whip. It was not loud, but it carried an authority that made the warriors hesitate. Ayanna stepped into the circle of light. She wore a blanket over her shoulders against the chill, her face unreadable, cold as a statue carved from river stone. Kohana looked at her, his jaw tight. "He is the scout, Ayanna, the ghost of the valley. He led them to your mother. He leads them here." "I know who he is," Ayanna said. She did not look at Luke, but at the knife. "But if he wanted to kill us, he would have brought the cavalry, not his own tired body. Let him up!" Kohana snarled but pulled the knife away. He spat on the ground next to Luke's head before stepping back. Luke rolled onto his side, coughing, and pushed himself to his feet. He brushed the dirt from his trousers, trying to salvage some scrap of dignity. "Speak!" Nantan's voice came from behind Ayanna. The old chief stood by the largest fire, wrapped in a buffalo robe. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharp. "Why does the white scout ride alone in the dark?" Luke stepped forward, conscious of the dozen arrows aimed at his back. He looked at Ayanna. Her eyes were hard, filled with the betrayal she had felt at the fort, but she nodded for him to continue. "Caldwell and Crook are coming," Luke said, his voice raspy. "At dawn. They are bringing the whole regiment." "We know they come," Kohana shouted. "We are ready to fight." "No." Luke turned to the young warrior. "You are ready to die. That is what they want. They staged the attack on the Miller Ranch. The arrows were fake. The horses were shod with iron. It was a lie to give Crook a reason to wipe you out. If you fight, you prove them right. If you run, they hunt you down." Nantan frowned. He looked at his daughter. "Translate every word." Ayanna spoke in Apache, her voice rapid and fluid. When she finished, she switched back to English, addressing Luke. "My father asks why we should believe the man who led the slaughter 5 years ago. Why would you save us now?" Luke looked at her. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. He wanted to tell her that the guilt had eaten a hole in his gut the size of a fist. But this was not the time for pity. "Because the tracks at the ranch were made by army horses," Luke said. "And because I am tired of burying women and children. Caldwell wants the land for the railroad. Crook wants a promotion. You are just obstacles to them. If we cannot fight and we cannot run," Nantan asked through Ayanna, "then what path is left?" "Law," Luke said. "White man's law." Kohana laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "White man's law is a noose." "Not if you have proof," Luke countered. "Caldwell has a ledger, a book where he writes the stolen rations. He keeps the real supplies in a stash, hidden in a canyon 2 days' ride from here. If we get that book and we find the stash, we can take it to the marshal in Tucson. We can prove Caldwell is a thief and Crook is a murderer." A stash. Ayana's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer to the fire. Where? I heard Red Jack Mercer talking. Luke lied smoothly. He had actually deduced it from the wagon tracks, but it did not matter. Box Canyon, near the Sulphur Springs. Ayana went still. The spirit's breath, she whispered. The Forbidden Valley. She turned to her father. They spoke in hushed tones. Kohana argued violently, gesturing toward the rifles piled near the tents. He wanted blood. He wanted to ambush the soldiers in the pass. But Nantan looked at the women huddled in the shadows. He looked at the few rounds of ammunition they had left. Finally, Nantan turned back to Luke. My daughter says you speak the truth about the tracks. She saw the iron shoes in her mind when you spoke. She says there is a path to the Forbidden Valley that only the Apache know. A spirit path. It is fast, but dangerous. I will go, Luke said immediately. You will not go alone, Nantan said. He placed a hand on Ayana's shoulder. My daughter will guide you. She knows the land. She speaks the tongue of the white courts. If this proof exists, she will bring it back. No, Kohana stepped forward, grabbing Ayana's arm. You cannot send her with him. He is a snake. Ayana shook off his hand. Her chin went up, the firelight catching the fierce determination in her eyes. I go, Kohana, not for him, for us. If we fight tomorrow, we lose. If we bring the truth, we might live. She turned to Luke. We leave now. The moon is bright enough. If we ride hard, we can reach the valley by sunset tomorrow. Luke nodded. He saw the way she looked at him like a tool she had to use, a weapon she despised but needed to hold. I am ready. The journey was a descent into a furnace. By mid-morning the next day, the sun was a white tyrant in a bleaching sky. The terrain was unforgiving, sharp volcanic rock that tore at the horses' hooves, followed by stretches of soft, deep sand that sucked the energy from their legs. They rode in silence. Luke stayed 10 paces behind Ayana. She rode with a natural grace, her body moving in perfect rhythm with her pinto mare. She did not look back. She did not speak. She was a figure of solitude, driven by duty. They had to skirt a patrol of cavalry near noon. They hid in a dry wash, holding the horses' noses to keep them from nickering as the blue-coated soldiers rode past on the ridge above. Luke watched Ayana through the dust. Her hand was on her knife, her eyes fixed on the soldiers with a mixture of fear and hatred. When the soldiers had passed, they pressed on. The heat grew intense. Luke offered her his canteen. Knowing hers was low, she took it without a word, drank sparingly, and handed it back without their fingers touching. You ride well for a white man, she said hours later, her voice startling him in the silence. It was not a compliment, merely an observation. I learned the hard way, Luke replied. And I had good teachers. Teachers you likely killed later, she said, the words sharp as flint. Luke flinched. Ayana, about the valley. Do not, she cut him off. We are allies of necessity. Luke Carver, do not mistake this for forgiveness. You are helping us to save your own soul. I am doing this to save my people. That is all. Luke fell silent. She was right. He had no right to ask for absolution. By late afternoon, the landscape began to change. The red rocks gave way to towering cliffs of gray granite. The air grew slightly heavier, carrying the faint, rotten egg smell of sulfur. We are close, Ayana said, pointing to a narrow fissure in the cliff face, the spirit's breath. The white men do not come here. They say the water is cursed. They led the horses through the fissure. It was a tight squeeze, the stone walls scraping against the saddlebags. But when they emerged on the other side, Luke caught his breath. It was a hidden oasis, a box canyon, sheltered from the wind and the worst of the sun. In the center lay a series of natural pools, fed by a steaming waterfall that cascaded down the rock face. Ferns and moss grew in the spray, a shocking vibrant green against the desert stone. Caldwell's stash is likely in the caves at the far end, Ayana said, sliding from her horse. But we cannot go there until dark. Red Jack will have guards. We rest the horses, Luke said, dismounting. And we wait. They picketed the horses in a patch of grass near the entrance. The tension between them was palpable, a physical weight. Ayanna busied herself checking the horses' hooves. Luke gathered dried sage for a small, smokeless fire. As the sun began to dip below the canyon rim, casting the valley in deep shadow, Luke felt the grime of the journey clinging to him like a second skin. The dust, the dried sweat, the blood from the scratch on his neck, it all felt unbearable. "I am going to wash," Luke said, gesturing toward the lower pools, away from where they had camped. "I will be quick." Ayanna did not look up. "Do not pollute the spirit's water," she muttered, but she waved a hand in dismissal. She picked up her rifle. "I will check the ridge. Make sure we are not followed." Luke walked down to the water. The pool was secluded, surrounded by large boulders. Steam rose from the surface, curling in the cooling air. He stripped off his shirt, his boots, and his trousers. His body was a map of violence. Scars from knives, bullets, and barbed wire crisscrossed his skin. He waded into the water. It was hot, scalding almost, but it felt like heaven. He sank down until the water lapped at his chin, closing his eyes. For the first time in 2 days, his muscles were unclenched. He scrubbed the dirt from his face, trying to wash away the image of the burning ranch, the angry face of Kohana, the cold eyes of Ayanna. He did not hear her return. Ayanna had climbed the ridge, finding nothing but empty desert. She came back down the rock path, her moccasins silent on the stone. She intended to fill the canteens at the lower pool, assuming Luke had finished. She rounded a large boulder and stopped dead. Luke was standing in the waist-deep water, his back to her. He was rinsing his hair, water cascading down his spine. The fading light caught the wet sheen of his skin. Then he turned. He froze. Ayanna froze. Time seemed to suspend itself. He was naked, exposed. The water hit him from the waist down, but the intimacy of the moment was shattering. In her culture, for an unmarried woman to see a man in this state was a profound taboo, a breach of modesty that carried a heavy stain. Ayanna's eyes went wide. She saw the vulnerability of him, the scar on his arm, the newer bruise on his ribs, the sheer humanness of the man she had villainized. Heat rushed to her face, hotter than the desert sun. She gasped, her hand flying to her throat. She spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Shame washed over her, not for him, but for herself. She had seen what was not hers to see. If the elders knew, she would be marked. I did not know," she stammered, her voice trembling. She took a step to run back toward the horses. "Ayanna, wait." Luke's voice was calm, unnaturally calm. He did not shout. He did not dive into the water to hide. She stopped, her back still turned to him, her knuckles white where she gripped her rifle. "Do not run," Luke said. She heard the splash of water as he moved toward the bank. She flinched, expecting him to come closer, to make a jest, to act like the rough men she had seen at the fort who whistled at women. But he stopped. "I am dressing. Stay there." The rustle of fabric, the sound of boots being pulled on. "You can turn around now," he said after a moment. Ayanna turned slowly. Luke stood by the water's edge. He was fully dressed, his shirt buttoned to the collar, his wet hair slicked back. He looked at her, and his expression was grave. There was no leering in his eyes, only a fierce solemnity. "I am sorry," Ayanna whispered, looking at the ground. "I have brought shame upon myself. If Kohana knew—" "He will never know," Luke said. He stepped forward, but stopped a respectful distance away. "Look at me, Ayanna." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "If this ever comes to light," Luke said, his voice low and intense, "if anyone ever asks, or if anyone ever saw, I will tell them I forced you to come down here. I will tell them I dragged you. I will say it was my doing, my sin." Ayanna stared at him. He was offering to take the blame for a crime he did not commit. In the eyes of her people, forcing a woman was a death sentence. "You would lie?" she asked. "I promised you in the storm," Luke said. "I am the kind of man who tries not to kill, and I am the kind of man who protects what matters." He took a breath, his eyes locking onto hers. "I promise you, Ayanna, you will never face shame again. Not from this, not while I draw breath. No man will ever use this moment to make you feel unclean." Something broke inside Ayanna, the wall of ice she had built around her heart since she saw his scar cracked. This was not the monster of her nightmares. A monster would have laughed. A monster would have boasted. This man offered her his honor as a shield. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why protect the daughter of your enemy?" "Because you are not my enemy," Luke said, "and I think I am tired of being yours." He turned and walked back toward the camp, leaving her standing by the steaming water. That night, the air in the canyon grew cold, but the fire Luke had built burned steadily. They sat on opposite sides of the flames, eating strips of dried venison. The silence was different now. It was no longer sharp. "My mother told me stories of this place," Ayanna said suddenly, breaking the silence. She stared into the fire. "She said the spirits of the warriors come here to wash their wounds before they go to the happy hunting grounds." Luke looked up. "She sounds like a wise woman?" "She was," Ayanna said. She looked at Luke, really looked at him. "She died holding me. She told me not to hate. She said hate is a fire that burns the house down while you are sleeping inside it." Luke stopped chewing. He looked at his hands. "I have no stories like that. My father was a drunkard in Tennessee. The army was the first place that gave me a bed and a pair of boots. I thought I was doing the right thing, following orders. And now I know that orders are just words spoken by men who do not have to watch the bleeding," Luke said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone he had picked up by the river. He tossed it gently in his hand. "I cannot undo the valley. Ayanna, I would give my right arm if I could, but I can help you save this one." Ayanna watched him. The firelight softened the lines of his face. She saw the sadness there, deep and old. "You are not the ghost," she said quietly. Luke looked at her, surprised. "The ghost is a monster." She continued. "You are just a man with many scars." She reached across the space between them. She did not touch him, but she pushed the water skin toward him. It was a peace offering. "Drink," she said. "Tomorrow we steal the book. Tomorrow we fight the snake." Luke took the skin. Their fingers brushed just for a second. A spark, hotter than the fire, jumped between them. He nodded, uncorking it. "Tomorrow," he agreed. Above them, the stars wheeled in the black sky, indifferent to the wars of men. But down in the canyon, amidst the steam and the stone, two enemies had ceased to be enemies. They were simply a man and a woman, bound by a secret and a promise, waiting for the dawn that would decide their fate. The descent from the Forbidden Valley was a silent affair, guided only by the pale light of the stars and the intuitive knowledge Ayanna held of the land. They left the horses tethered in a dry wash a mile from the box canyon Luke had identified from the wagon tracks. This was not the main agency, but a secluded drop-off point nestled in a fissure of red rock, guarded by men who were paid not to ask questions. They crept forward on their bellies, the scent of sagebrush crushed beneath them, masking their approach. Below, in the basin of the canyon, a rough timber shack stood against the cliff wall. Two men sat on crates outside, a lantern casting long, dancing shadows. They were passing a bottle of whiskey back and forth, their rifles leaning carelessly against the wood. Ayanna squinted. Through the gaps in the shack's planking, she could see the distinct shapes of barrels and crates. "I see the markings," she whispered, her voice barely a breath against the wind. "U.S. government. Those are the rations my father was told never arrived." Luke nodded grimly beside her. "Flour, salt pork, maybe blankets. Enough to keep your people fed through the winter. Caldwell is hoarding it to sell to the miners up north." "We should burn it," Ayanna hissed, her hand going to the knife at her belt. "Burn it so he cannot profit. If we burn it, your people still starve," Luke countered, placing a hand on her arm to steady her. "And we destroy the evidence. We need proof that a judge in Tucson cannot ignore. We need the ledger." Ayanna pulled her arm away, though the warmth of his touch lingered. The Book of Numbers. Men like Caldwell do not trust their memory with money. Luke said, he writes everything down. Every pound of flour. Every dollar stolen. That book will be in his office at the agency. That is our target. They withdrew silently, mounting their horses and turning back toward the fort. The realization hung heavy between them. Seeing the stolen food was one thing, but retrieving the black and white proof required walking straight into the lion's den. The agency compound was quiet when they arrived 2 hours past midnight. The moon was obscured by thick, racing clouds, signaling a shift in the weather. The air had grown heavy and static, the kind of pressure that builds before the sky breaks open. They left the horses near the blacksmith's shed at the rear perimeter. Ayanna sketched the layout in the dirt with her finger. "The office is here," she whispered, pointing to a square. "Attached to the supply room. The back door has a weak latch. I used to sneak in there as a child to steal sugar cubes. You stay with the horses," Luke said, checking the load in his revolver. "No." Ayanna stood up. "I know the room. You can barely read the signs on the trail, let alone a book in the dark. I'm going." Luke did not argue. They moved together, shadows merging with shadows. They slipped past the sleeping barracks and the pacing sentry at the main gate, using the noise of the wind to cover their footsteps. At the back door of the office, Luke used his knife. He slid the blade between the jamb and the wood, lifting the latch with a soft click. He pushed the door open and they slipped inside. The office smelled of stale tobacco and ink. Luke struck a match, shielding the flame with his cupped hand. The sudden flare of light revealed a heavy oak desk and a wall of filing cabinets. "Hurry," Luke whispered. Ayanna moved to the desk. She opened the drawers, her fingers rifling through papers. Maps, land surveys, letters from the railroad company. Then, in the bottom drawer, beneath a false bottom of loose velvet, she felt the heavy leather binding. She pulled it out. San Carlos Agency. Accounts and inventory. 1878. "I have it," she said. At that moment, the door to the hallway swung open. Light from a kerosene lamp flooded the room. A soldier stood there, his tunic unbuttoned, his eyes bleary with drink. He blinked, looking from Luke to Ayanna, his brain struggling to process the scene. "Hey," the soldier slurred. "What are you—" "Indian." He reached for the pistol at his belt. "Run!" Luke shouted. He shoved Ayanna toward the window and kicked the desk over, sending it crashing into the soldier just as the man fired. The gunshot was deafening in the small room. The bullet splintered the wood frame of the window as Ayanna vaulted through it. "Alarm, alarm!" the soldier screamed, entangled in the furniture. Luke followed Ayanna out the window, landing hard in the dust. Bells began to clang across the compound. Shouts erupted from the barracks. "To the horses!" Luke yelled. They sprinted across the open ground. Ayanna clutched the ledger to her chest. Behind them, muzzle flashes lit up the night. A bullet kicked up dirt near Ayanna's feet. They reached the blacksmith's shed, but disaster struck. Ayanna's pinto mare, spooked by the gunfire and the bells, had pulled her picket pin and bolted into the darkness. Only Luke's battle-hardened roan remained, dancing nervously but holding its ground. "Get on!" Luke grabbed Ayanna by the waist and threw her into the saddle. He swung up behind her, grabbing the reins. "Halt fire!" Major Crook's voice boomed from the porch of the officers' quarters. A volley of shots rang out. Luke felt a hammer blow to his left shoulder, a sudden, searing heat that punched the breath out of him. He gritted his teeth, suppressing a cry, and kicked the roan into a gallop. The horse surged forward, crashing through the flimsy wooden gate at the rear of the fort. They raced into the black void of the desert, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them as the wind began to scream. The storm hit them 10 minutes later. It was not rain, but sand, a wall of grit and fury that swallowed the world whole. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping the sand into a frenzy that reduced visibility to the length of the horse's neck. Luke's left arm hung uselessly at his side. He could feel the warm, sticky flow of blood soaking his shirt and running down his flank. He held the reins with his right hand, leaning forward to shield Ayanna with his body. "We have to stop!" Ayanna shouted over the roar of the wind. She could feel Luke slumping against her back. "The horse cannot see. Keep going!" Luke gritted out. "They will track us." "They cannot track ghosts in a storm," she yelled back. "We need shelter!" The horse stumbled, nearly throwing them both. Luke groaned, his grip failing. Ayanna grabbed the reins from him. She peered into the swirling brown chaos. To the left, she saw the dark, jagged outline of the tree line that marked the foothills. She steered the horse toward the trees. Through the gloom, a shape emerged, a low, flat roof. It was a trapper's cabin, long abandoned. Its logs bleached gray by the sun. They reached the door. Ayanna slid from the saddle and pulled Luke down. He was heavy, his legs buckling as soon as they hit the ground. She dragged him toward the door, kicking it open. It swung on one rusted hinge, banging against the wall. Inside, it was dark and smelled of rats and old pine needles, but it was out of the wind. Ayanna helped Luke to a corner where a pile of dry leaves and old furs lay. He collapsed onto them, shivering violently. Ayanna struggled to shut the door, propping a broken table against it to keep the wind out. Then she turned to Luke. He was pale, his skin gray in the gloom. His eyes were closed. "Luke," she called, kneeling beside him. "Luke, listen to me." He did not answer. His teeth chattered. Ayanna felt the wound. His left shoulder was a mess of blood. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of the deltoid, missing the bone but tearing a vessel. He was losing blood fast, and the shock of the cold night air combined with the blood loss was sending him into hypothermia. She needed to see the wound. She pulled her knife and cut the fabric of his shirt, peeling the soaked cotton away from his skin. His chest was revealed, broad and muscled, but marred by a map of old violence. Scars from knives, burns, and other bullets crisscrossed his skin. But Ayanna did not have time to dwell on his history. She needed to stop the bleeding. She reached into the pouch at her belt. She had yarrow root and dried sage medicines her mother had taught her to carry. She chewed the yarrow into a poultice and pressed it deep into the bullet hole. Luke cried out in his unconscious state, his body arching off the floor. "Shh, stay still," she commanded, though her voice shook. She tore strips from her petticoat and bound the wound tight, applying pressure until the flow of bright red blood slowed to a trickle. But he was still shivering. His skin was ice cold to the touch. The cabin was freezing, the wind whistling through the chinks in the logs. They had no wood for a fire, and lighting one might draw the soldiers if the storm broke. She looked at him. He was dying of cold. Ayanna made a choice. It was a choice that defied the laws of her people and the laws of his. But it was the only law that mattered in the wilderness survival. She lay down beside him on the pile of furs. She pulled the remaining tattered blankets over them both. Then, she pressed her body against his. She wrapped her arms around his torso, careful of the wound, and pressed her legs against his. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, trying to transfer her own heat into his freezing frame. His heart was beating erratically against her chest. "Do not die, white man," she whispered fiercely. "You promised to fix this. Do not you dare die and leave me with your debt." Luke stirred. The warmth was seeping into him, pulling him back from the edge of the dark abyss. But his mind was still lost in the fever of blood loss. He was not in the cabin. He was back in the valley, 5 years ago. "Stop," he mumbled, his voice thick and slurred. "Lieutenant, stop them." Ayanna stiffened. "No." Luke turned his head, his cheek brushing against her hair. "The children. Don't shoot. I didn't know. God, I didn't know." A tear leaked from his closed eye, tracking through the dust on his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, a broken sound that seemed to come from the bottom of his soul. "I'm sorry for the valley." Ayanna lay frozen, her heart hammered against her ribs. Hearing him admit it, hearing the raw agony in his voice, was different from knowing it as a fact. It tore at the scab of her own grief. She remembered the smoke. She remembered the screams, but she also felt the man in her arms. He was shaking not just from the cold, but from a nightmare he had lived with for 5 years. She did not pull away. She could not. She held him tighter, tears of her own stinging her eyes. "Sleep," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Sleep, ghost. The morning will bring enough judgment." Morning broke with a silence that was deafening. The storm had passed, leaving the world scoured clean and bright. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the cabin logs, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Luke opened his eyes. His head throbbed, and his shoulder felt like it was being chewed by a coyote. He blinked, realizing he was warm. He looked down. Ayanna was asleep beside him. Her head rested on his good shoulder, her hand flat against his chest. Her black hair was spread across his skin like silk. Memory flooded back. The office, the shot, the storm, the cold. He moved slightly, and she woke instantly. She pulled away, scrambling to a sitting position, her eyes wide and alert. She looked at him, and then down at her own disheveled state. She smoothed her dress, her face setting into a mask of hardness. "You are alive," she said flatly. "Thanks to you," Luke rasped. He tried to sit up but groaned as pain shot through his arm. He looked at the bandage. It was professional, tight and clean. "You saved me." Ayanna stood up and walked to the door, pushing the table aside to look out. "I saved the witness. Do not mistake it for anything else." She turned back to him. The light from the door hit her face, revealing the conflict warring in her eyes. "Last night, you spoke." Luke closed his eyes for a second. "What did I say?" "You spoke to a lieutenant. You begged him not to shoot." Ayanna's voice trembled. "You said you did not know." Luke exhaled slowly. He swung his legs off the pallet and sat up, clutching his ribs. It was time. No more hiding. "It was the Battle of Salt Creek," Luke said, his voice steady but quiet. 5 years ago. I was the lead scout for the 3rd Cavalry. We were tracking a raiding party, Geronimo's men. We thought—" He looked up at her. "I found the trail. It led into a canyon. I saw smoke. I told the major it was them. I was sure. I was so arrogant, so sure of my eyes." Ayanna stood against the wall, her hands clenched into fists. She was shaking. "We rode in at dawn," Luke continued, forcing himself to look at her. "When we broke the ridge, I saw the tents. I saw women hanging corn. I saw children playing in the creek. I realized I had led 500 men to slaughter a peace camp. My mother was hanging corn," Ayanna whispered. Tears streamed down her face, hot and angry. "She shouted for me to run. Then she fell." "I tried to turn the column," Luke said, his voice breaking. "I rode back. I grabbed the bugler. I tried to sound the retreat, but the major, he gave the order to fire at will. I spent the next hour pulling soldiers off women. I took a saber to the face from my own sergeant because I stopped him from killing a boy." He touched the scar on his cheek. "It was not enough. I buried 40 people that day. And then I took off my uniform and I walked into the desert. I have been walking ever since." Ayanna crossed the room in 2 strides. She raised her hand and slapped him a cracking blow that snapped his head to the side. "You led them," she screamed. "You were the eyes of the snake. My mother is dead because you were arrogant. I should have let you freeze. I should have put the knife in your heart while you slept." Luke did not raise a hand to defend himself. He tasted blood in his mouth. He turned back to face her. "Yes," he said. "You should have. And if you want to use that knife now, I will not stop you. I deserve it. I have deserved it every day for 5 years." Ayanna stared at him. She saw the resignation in his eyes. He was not asking for mercy. He was accepting his fate. Her hand hovered over her knife. She wanted to do it. The grief demanded blood. But then she looked at the ledger lying on the floor, the book that could save the children who were still alive. She let out a sob of frustration and turned away, slamming her fist against the log wall. "I cannot kill you," she cried. "I cannot kill you because the living need you more than the dead hate you. Ayanna." "Do not speak," she hissed, her back to him. "We are not friends. We are not lovers. We are partners in a war. When Caldwell is gone, when my people are safe, then we will see if you deserve to live." Luke nodded to her back. "Fair enough." They spent the day in the cabin, waiting for the horses to recover and for Luke's strength to return. The tension was brittle, sharp as glass. By evening, the wind had died completely. The desert was painted in shades of lavender and gold. They built a small fire outside the cabin to roast a rabbit Ayanna had snared. Luke sat by the fire, struggling to rewrap his shoulder with one hand. Ayanna watched him for a moment, then sighed with irritation. She moved over and slapped his hand away. "You will bleed again, you fool," she muttered. She knelt before him and began to adjust the bandage. Her hands were rough but efficient. Luke watched her face. Her eyes were downcast, focused on the knot. "Why didn't you leave me?" Luke asked softly. "I told you," she said without looking up. "The ledger." "No," Luke said. "You could have taken the ledger and ridden on. You stayed. You kept me warm." Ayanna froze. Her hands rested on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel its steady, heavy rhythm. She looked up. Her dark eyes searched for his blue ones. She saw the guilt. Yes, but she also saw something else. She saw a man who had walked into hell to try and make amends. She saw the man who had offered to ruin his own name to save her honor in the spring. "I stayed because I hate you," she whispered, but the venom was gone from her voice. "And because I am terrified that you are the only one who understands." "Understand what?" "What it is like to be alone in the middle of two worlds," she said. "To be a traitor to everyone." Luke reached up with his good hand. He hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. She did not pull away. "You are not a traitor, Ayanna," he said. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known." The air between them changed. It charged with the electricity of the storm that had passed. The anger, the grief, the fear, it all twisted into a desperate need for connection. Ayanna made a sound, half sob, half sigh, and leaned forward. Their lips met. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of salt and smoke and unsaid apologies. Ayanna kissed him with the fury of her grief, and Luke kissed her with the desperation of a drowning man finding air. His hand tangled in her hair, pulling her closer. Her hands gripped his shirt, bunching the fabric tight. For a moment, there was no history, no army, no tribe, just the fire and the two of them. Then Ayanna pulled back. She was breathing hard, her lips swollen. She stared at him, her eyes wide with the realization of what she had done. She scrambled back, standing up. "This changes nothing," she said, her voice shaking. "We still have a war to fight." Luke looked up at her, his hand falling to his side. He nodded slowly. "I know. But at least now we know what we are fighting for." Ayanna turned and walked into the darkness of the trees, needing to hide the flush on her face. Luke stared into the fire, touching his lips. The taste of her was seared into him. He knew then that he would burn down the whole territory if that was what it took to keep her safe. The smell of burning sagebrush reached them long before they saw the smoke. It was a thick, acrid scent that coated the back of the throat, carrying with it the unmistakable copper tang of blood. Luke Carver and Ayanna rode hard, their horses blowing foam, the stolen ledger wrapped in oilcloth and strapped tight to Ayanna's saddle horn. The sun was high and merciless, bleaching the color from the red rocks of the canyon floor. They crested the final ridge overlooking the valley where the Apache village lay, and Ayanna let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. Below them, the world was on fire. The wickiups, usually arranged in a peaceful circle, were engulfed in flames. Thick columns of black smoke rose into the still air, blotting out the sun. Through the haze, small figures ran like ants disturbed from a hill, chased by men on horseback. The distinct crack of army carbines echoed off the canyon walls, punctuated by the deeper, booming reports of buffalo rifles. "They came early," Luke shouted over the noise of the wind. "Caldwell did not wait for dawn. He wanted a massacre, not a battle." They spurred their horses down the scree slope, sliding and scrambling toward the chaos. Halfway down, they intercepted a group of women and children fleeing toward the narrow neck of the canyon. An elderly woman grabbed Ayana's stirrup, her face streaked with soot and tears. "They are shooting everyone," the woman cried in Apache, which Ayana translated frantically in her mind even as she answered. "The Red Jack men, they set fire to the winter stores first. Nantan is holding the line at the river, but there are too many." "Go to the high caves," Ayana commanded, her voice cracking with fear but holding authority. "Take the children deep. Do not come out until the shooting stops." She turned to Luke. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown black with terror, but her jaw was set. "My father is down there. We cannot just ride in," Luke said, his mind shifting instantly from civilian to scout, analyzing the battlefield. "They have the high ground on the east ridge. See the glint sharpshooters?" He grabbed the bridle of her horse. "Listen to me. If we ride in together, we die, and that book dies with us. If that book burns, Caldwell wins. I will not leave my father." "I am not asking you to," Luke said intensely. "We split. You take the women and the book up the goat path to the west. Secure the non-combatants. I will take the east flank. I know how Crook positions his men. I can draw their fire and buy Nantan time to pull back." "You are one man," she argued. "You are wounded." "I am a scout," Luke replied grimly. "I am hard to kill." He looked at her, his blue eyes fierce. "Go! Save the future! I will try to save the present." Ayana hesitated for a heartbeat, looking at his bandaged shoulder and the blood that had already begun to seep through his shirt again. Then she nodded. "Do not die. Luke Carver. Go!" She wheeled her horse and galloped toward the rocky incline where the women were climbing. Luke turned his roan gelding toward the gunfire. He pulled his Winchester rifle from its scabbard, levered around into the chamber, and rode straight into hell. The village was a slaughterhouse of confusion. The air was thick with smoke and dust. Luke abandoned his horse near the riverbank, slapping its rump to send it running to safety. He moved on foot, crouching low, using the smoke as cover. Ahead, he saw a line of Apache warriors behind a barricade of overturned wagons and fallen logs. They were firing arrows and a few old muskets, desperate to hold back a wave of blue-coated soldiers advancing from the tree line. In the center of the line stood Kohana. The young warrior was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his chest heaving. He fired his rifle, the last of his ammunition, then threw it down and drew his knife, screaming a war cry that sounded more like a death song. Luke slid into the dirt beside him. Kohana spun around, raising the knife. When he saw Luke, his snarl faltered. "You," Kohana spat. "You brought them. I am here to stop them," Luke roared back, firing 3 rapid shots over the barricade. 2 soldiers in the distance ducked, 1 spun and fell. "Caldwell has sharpshooters on the ridge. If you stay here, you are fish in a barrel. You have to fall back to the canyon narrows." "My chief is there," Kohana pointed through the smoke. 50 yards away, near the burning remains of the council lodge. Chief Nantan stood. He was not fighting. He was directing the evacuation, ushering terrified families toward the safety of the rocks, his tall figure a beacon in the chaos. Major Crook sat on his horse near the tree line, safely out of arrow range, directing his troops with a saber. Beside him, Red Jack Mercer and his gang were not firing at the warriors. They were firing at the tents. They were shooting the dogs. They were creating terror. "They are flanking you on the right," Luke yelled at Kohana. "Tell your men, retreat to the rocks, I will cover you." Kohana looked at the white man, then at the soldiers closing in. He made a decision. He nodded once, a sharp jerk of the chin. "If you die," Kohana shouted, "I will sing your song." Kohana let out a piercing whistle, signaling his warriors. The Apache line broke, melting away from the barricade and retreating toward the canyon walls where the terrain favored their skills. Luke stayed behind for a moment, firing his Winchester until the barrel was hot to the touch. He dropped 3 of Red Jack's men who tried to rush the gap. He was buying seconds with bullets. High on the western slope, Ayana had herded the women and children into the safety of a deep overhang. She gripped the ledger against her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. Below, she could see the battle shifting. The warriors were pulling back, drawing the soldiers into the narrow throat of the canyon. It was a trap. Nantan's favorite tactic. But then she saw it. Major Crook, realizing the warriors were slipping away, shouted an order. Red Jack Mercer laughed and turned his horse. He did not chase the warriors. He rode toward a group of stragglers, an old woman and 2 children who had been cut off near the river. Red Jack raised his pistol. "No!" Ayanna screamed from the cliffs, though her voice was lost in the din. Down in the valley. Chief Nantan saw it too. He was safe. He had reached the edge of the rocks, but he saw the bandit aiming at the child. Nantan did not hesitate. He did not run for cover. He ran into the open ground. He moved with a speed that defied his age, placing his body between the bandit and the child. Red Jack fired. The bullet struck Nantan in the chest. The old chief staggered, his knees buckling. He fell to the red earth, his arms still spread wide as if trying to hold back the tide of violence. A silence seemed to ripple across the battlefield. Even the soldiers paused. To shoot a chief who was protecting a child was a dishonor that even the hardest cavalryman felt in his gut. "Father!" Ayanna abandoned her position. She scrambled down the rock face, ignoring the loose stones that tore at her hands. She ran through the smoke, past the stunned soldiers, past Luke, who was running from the barricade. She slid to her knees beside Nantan. His breath was wet and rattling. Blood stained the buckskin of his shirt, blooming like a dark rose. He looked up, his eyes finding hers. "Ayanna," he whispered. "Do not speak," she sobbed, pressing her hands over the wound, trying to keep the life inside him. "The medicine man is coming. Hold on." Nantan shook his head weakly. He reached up, his hand trembling, and gripped her wrist. His fingers were strong, even in death. "The arrow breaks," he rasped. "The mind stays sharp. Do not fight them with hate. Fight them with truth." He looked past her, at the smoke rising from his village, then back at his daughter. "Lead them to the morning." His hand went slack. The light in his eyes faded, returning to the earth from which it came. Ayanna froze. A scream built in her chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. But she did not let it out. She swallowed it. She swallowed it down until it burned like a coal in her stomach. She looked up. Major Crook and Agent Caldwell had ridden forward, surrounded by 20 soldiers. They looked down at the body of the chief with cold satisfaction. "A tragic accident," Caldwell said loudly, adjusting his silk tie. "If he had not resisted the lawful retrieval of stolen property, he would be alive. He was protecting a child." Luke's voice was a roar. He stepped out from behind a wagon, his rifle raised. His face was streaked with soot and blood, his eyes burning with a cold blue fire. "And that property was not stolen. It was planted." "Mr. Carver," Crook sneered, pointing his saber. "Arrest that man. He's a deserter and a traitor." Soldiers moved to surround Luke. Kohana and the remaining warriors emerged from the rocks. Arrows knocked, rifles raised. The standoff was absolute. One spark, and everyone would die. Then, the sound of galloping horses thundered from the south. A cloud of dust heralded the arrival of a new group. At the head rode a woman with hair like flame, Tess McGraw, and beside her rode a man with a silver star pinned to his vest. Marshal Reyes. "Hold your fire." Reyes shouted, his voice booming with the authority of the federal government. He rode his horse straight between the 2 lines, holding up a hand. "By the authority of the United States Marshal Service, I order all weapons holstered. This is a military operation. Marshal," Crook barked, "you have no jurisdiction here." "I have jurisdiction over murder, Major," Reyes said calmly. He looked down at Nantan's body, then at Caldwell. "And I have jurisdiction over fraud." "Fraud," Caldwell laughed nervously. "I am the Indian agent. I am the law on this reservation." "Not anymore." Ayanna stood up. She rose slowly from her father's body. Her hands were covered in his blood. She did not wipe them. She wanted them to see it. She walked forward, stepping between Luke and the soldiers. She did not look like a defeated girl. She looked like a queen of the desert. In her hands, she held the heavy leather ledger. "This is the book of your lies, Henry Caldwell," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried across the silence of the canyon. "Every sack of flour you stole, every blanket you sold to the miners, every dollar you paid to Red Jack Mercer to burn our homes." Caldwell's face went pale. That is stolen government property. She is a thief." Ayanna opened the book. Her fingers left bloody smears on the white pages. She began to read. "August 4th, 500 pounds of beef, diverted to Tucson mining camp. Signed, Henry Caldwell. September 10th, payment to Mercer Gang for services rendered at Miller Ranch, $200. She looked up, her eyes piercing Caldwell. "Is this also a lie, or is your signature the only true thing you have ever written?" The soldiers glanced at each other. They were enlisted men, poor men. They knew what it was like to be hungry. To hear that their own government agent was stealing food and hiring outlaws turned their stomachs. Their rifles lowered. "She is lying!" Caldwell shrieked. "Major, shoot her! She is inciting rebellion!" Major Crook looked around. He saw the doubt in his men's eyes. He saw the marshal's hand hovering over his gun. He saw his career turning to ash. Desperation took hold. "I gave an order," Crook screamed. He drew a hidden Derringer pistol from his sleeve. "Kill the witch!" He leveled the gun at Ayanna. Time seemed to slow down. Ayanna saw the black bore of the pistol. She did not move. She did not flinch. Luke moved. He threw himself across the space between them. He did not try to tackle Crook. He threw himself in front of Ayanna. The gun cracked. Luke jerked violently as the bullet tore across his side, spinning him around. He fell to his knees, gasping. At the same instant, a rifle shot rang out from the rocks. Kohana. The bullet struck Major Crook's hand, shattering the pistol and the bones of his fingers. Crook screamed, clutching his mangled hand, falling from his saddle. "Enough!" Marshal Reyes roared. He drew his twin Colts. Deputies secure them. The deputies who had ridden with Reyes surged forward. Red Jack Mercer tried to draw, but he found himself looking down the barrels of a dozen Apache rifles. He raised his hands slowly. Caldwell tried to spur his horse to run, but Tess McGraw was faster. She grabbed his bridle and yanked him from the saddle, throwing him into the dirt. "That is for the hungry babies," Tess spat. Within moments, it was over. Caldwell was in irons. Crook was wailing in the dust, being tended to by a grim-faced medic. Red Jack and his men were disarmed and tied, but Ayanna did not care about them. She dropped to her knees beside Luke. He was lying on his back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The new wound on his ribs was bleeding freely, mixing with the old blood on his shoulder. "Luke," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "Luke, look at me." He opened his eyes. They were hazy with pain, but they focused on her face. He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. Did we win?" he rasped. "Yes," Ayanna said, tears finally spilling over, washing tracks through the soot on her face. "We won. The marshal has them. The book is safe. Good," Luke whispered. He reached up, his hand shaking, and touched the blood on her cheek. Her father's blood. "I told you, I would not let you face it alone." "You took the bullet," she sobbed. "Why do you always stand in front of the gun? You stupid white man!" "Habit," Luke wheezed. His eyes fluttered shut. "Just habit. Do not sleep," Ayanna commanded, grabbing his shoulders. "Kohana, help me. We need to get him to the medicine lodge." Kohana stepped forward. He looked down at the man who had been his enemy. He looked at the blood Luke had shed for Ayanna. The hatred in the warrior's eyes was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "He fought well," Kohana said. He bent down and lifted Luke's upper body with surprising gentleness. "We will carry him." As they lifted Luke, Ayanna looked around the canyon. The smoke was still rising. Her father was dead. Her village was burned. But the silence that hung over the valley was not the silence of extinction. It was the silence of survival. She watched Luke's unconscious face as they carried him away. And in that moment, amidst the ruins of her life, she realized the terrifying truth. She did not just respect him. She did not just need him. She loved him. She loved the broken, scarred, guilt-ridden scout who had come back from the dead to save her. And as she walked beside the litter, her hand gripping his limp one, Ayanna swore a new oath. He had promised she would never face shame again. Now, she promised that he would never face death alone again. If he lived, he belonged to her, and if he died, she would burn the world down to find him in the afterlife. The smoke had cleared from the canyon, but the scent of ash clung to the earth like a second skin. It was a heavy, mournful smell, but beneath it, the sharp fragrance of pine and damp soil promised that life would eventually return. 3 days had passed since the battle. The Apache village was a hive of somber activity. The wickiups that had been burned were being cleared away, the charred skeletons of the poles replaced by fresh willow branches cut from the riverbank. On a high ridge overlooking the valley, the funeral scaffold for Chief Nantan had been raised. His body was wrapped in the finest buffalo robes, his face turned toward the rising sun. The women had wailed for 2 days, their cries echoing off the canyon walls, a sound of raw, unvarnished grief that made the horses in the corral stamp nervously. Ayanna stood at the base of the ridge. She had cut her hair short in the tradition of mourning. She felt hollowed out, as if the fire that had consumed the village had also burned away the soft parts of her girlhood. She was no longer just a daughter. She was the voice of the silence her father had left behind. She turned and walked back toward the medicine lodge, a small structure set apart from the others. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burning sage and strong herbal poultices. Luke Carver lay on a pile of furs. He was pale, the skin beneath his tan drawn tight against his cheekbones. The bullet from Major Crook's pistol had broken a rib and torn through muscle, but it had missed the lung. The village medicine man had cauterized the wound and sung the songs of healing, but it was Ayanna who had sat by him through the fever dreams. She knelt beside him now, a bowl of willow bark tea in her hands. Luke opened his eyes. They were clear today, the haze of infection gone, replaced by a weary alertness. "The drum stopped," Luke rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "The mourning period is ending," Ayanna said softly. She lifted his head gently to help him drink. "Now comes the hard part." "Living," Luke drank, grimacing at the bitter taste. He looked at her, his gaze lingering on her shorn hair. He reached up, his hand hovering near her face before dropping back to the furs. "Your hair." "It grows back," Ayanna said, setting the bowl down. "Unlike a father." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the things they could not change. "You should not be here," Luke said, looking at the roof of the lodge. "You have a tribe to lead. Sitting with a white scout does not help your standing with the elders." "I sat with the man who took a bullet for me," Ayanna corrected him. "The elders know honor when they see it, even if it wears a blue coat's trousers." "I am not honorable, Ayanna," Luke muttered, closing his eyes. "I am just hard to kill." The trial was held a week later, not in a grand courtroom, but in the dusty square of the town of San Carlos, beneath the shade of a sprawling cottonwood tree. Marshal Reyes sat behind a requisitioned table, his silver star gleaming in the dappled sunlight. To his right sat a colonel from Fort Huachuca, a man with a stern face who had arrived to oversee the military aspect of the disaster. Henry Caldwell sat on a crate, his hands manacled. His fine suit was ruined, stained with dirt and sweat. He looked smaller now, stripped of his authority. Major Silas Crook lay on a stretcher nearby, his hand heavily bandaged, his face gray with pain and humiliation. The townspeople, the miners, and the soldiers gathered around in a hush. They had heard rumors, but today they would hear the truth. Tess McGraw was the first to speak. The widow stood tall, her hands smoothing her apron. "I run the way station," she said clearly. "I see what comes in and what goes out. I saw Caldwell's wagons leave at midnight, headed north to the mines. He told me it was spoiled grain." But the men driving them were eating biscuits made from that flour. And they looked healthy enough to me. Other ranchers stepped forward. Men who had lost cattle to real thieves and knew the difference between an Apache raid and a staged crime. Then, the crowd parted. Ayanna walked into the square. She wore a clean buckskin dress, her short hair framing a face that was set like flint. She carried the heavy leather ledger in her arms. A murmur went through the crowd. An Apache woman testifying in a white man's court was unheard of. "State your name," Marshal Reyes said gently. "I am Ayanna," she said. Her English was flawless, projecting to the back of the crowd without a tremor. "Daughter of Nantan, and since his murder, I speak for the Chiricahua of the Dragoon Valley." She stepped forward and placed the ledger on the table. She opened it to the page stained with her own bloody fingerprints from the day of the battle. "This book was taken from the desk of Agent Caldwell," she said. "It details the theft of 3 tons of flour, 200 blankets, and 50 rifles. It details the payment of $500 to the man known as Red Jack Mercer to burn the ranch of John Miller and blame my people." Caldwell jumped up. "She is a savage. She cannot read. That book means nothing." "I can read," Ayanna said coldly, turning to face him. "I can read better than you can lie. Mr. Caldwell, on page 42, you wrote conflict necessary to clear valley for Southern Pacific track laying. Expected casualty rate 80%. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The colonel leaned forward, snatching the book. He read the entry, his face darkening with rage. "This is treason," the colonel whispered. He looked at Crook. "And you, Major, you colluded in this?" Crook groaned, turning his head away. The verdict was swift. Henry Caldwell was stripped of his position and remanded to federal custody to face charges of embezzlement and conspiracy to commit murder. Major Silas Crook was stripped of his command to be transported to Leavenworth for court-martial. The surviving members of the Red Jack gang were sentenced to 20 years of hard labor. But justice for the dead did not bring back the dead. After the crowd dispersed, Marshal Reyes approached Ayanna. He took off his hat. "The government in Washington is embarrassed. They want this settled quietly." "Quietly means they want us to disappear," Ayanna said. "No," Reyes said. "I have secured a guarantee. The valley remains yours. A new agent is coming, a man named Harrison. He is a Quaker. He is honest. And the government is sending emergency rations to replace what was burned. It is not perfect, Ayanna, but it is the future." Ayanna looked at the mountains. "It is a breath of air," she said. "We will have to see if we can breathe it." "You did well today," Tess McGraw said, coming up to put a hand on Ayanna's shoulder. "You spoke like a lawyer. You should think about that. Your people need someone who knows the words on the paper as well as the arrows in the quiver." Ayanna looked at the ledger. Now, evidence in a box. She felt the weight of 2 worlds pressing down on her shoulders. She was the bridge now, and bridges were made to be walked upon. Life in the village began to find a rhythm again, though it was a limping, painful cadence. Kohana came to Ayanna 3 evenings later. He had been leading the hunting parties, working tirelessly to bring meat to the families who had lost their fathers. He looked older, the recklessness in his eyes replaced by a grim responsibility. They stood by the river, watching the moon rise over the water. "The council met," Kohana said, his voice low. "They say we need a war chief. They look at me. You fought bravely," Ayanna said. "They are right to look at you." "I told them I cannot lead alone," Kohana said. He turned to her. "I need a wife, Ayanna. I need the daughter of Nantan beside me. If we marry, the tribe will be whole again. The blood of the chief and the strength of the warrior." Ayanna looked at him. She saw the hope in his eyes and the tradition that stretched back 1,000 years. It would be the easy path, the expected path. "Kohana," she said gently, "you are a great warrior. You will be a great chief, but I cannot be your wife." "Why?" Kohana asked, hurt flashing across his face. "Because of the white man. Because of me," Ayanna said. "If I marry you, I will become the wife of the chief. I will be expected to stay in the tent, to weave, to raise children. But my father made me promise to fight with my mind. I have to go to the fort. I have to speak to the agents. I have to be the voice that argues with the colonel. She touched his arm. I cannot be your shadow. Kohana, I have to be the sun in a different sky. Kohana looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded, a slow, painful acceptance. You have changed. Ayana. The fire in the village burned away the girl I knew. We all burned, she whispered. He took her hand, squeezed it once, and walked away into the darkness. Luke Carver was packing. His shoulder was stiff, and his ribs ached with every movement, but he could stand, and he could ride. He had retrieved his gear from the lodge and brought the roan gelding to the edge of the camp. He threw his saddlebags over the horse's back. They were light. He did not own much. A rifle, a bedroll, a few changes of clothes, and a conscience that was slightly lighter than it had been a week ago, but still heavy enough to drag him down. He looked back at the village. He saw the children playing near the stream. He saw the women cooking. He saw the way they looked at him when he walked past. Some looked with gratitude. They knew he had fought for them. But others looked at him and saw the ghost of the valley. They saw the blue eyes of the enemy. They saw the reason their mothers and fathers were dead 5 years ago. He could not stay. He was a constant reminder of their pain. And worse, he was a stain on Ayana. If she was to lead, she could not have a white drifter, a man with blood on his hands, sleeping in her camp. It would weaken her. It would give Kohana and the traditionalists a reason to doubt her. He tightened the cinch. He would ride south. Mexico was warm. The tequila was cheap. He could disappear there. You leave without a word. The voice stopped him. He did not turn around immediately. He rested his forehead against the warm leather of his saddle. I leave because words are cheap, Luke said. He turned. Ayana stood 10 feet away. She held a basket of dried corn in her hands, but she dropped it. The kernels spilled into the dust, unnoticed. You were going to sneak away, she said, her voice trembling with anger. Like a thief in the night. I am a thief, Luke said. I stole 5 years of peace from you. I will not steal your future too. My future is mine to choose. Ayana stepped closer, her eyes blazing. Look at them. Ayana, Luke gestured toward the village. Look at the old women. When they see me, they do not see Luke Carver. They see the cavalry. They see the massacre. As long as I am here, the wound will never heal. And as long as I am by your side, they will question your loyalty. I do not care what they question. I do, Luke shouted. I care you are the leader now. You have to be pure. You have to be Apache. You cannot be the woman who nurses the white devil. He grabbed the reins and put his foot in the stirrup. I am going to Mexico. It is better this way. You coward, Ayana said. Luke froze. You stood in front of a gun for me, she said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. But you cannot stand the looks of old women you promised me. Luke, by the hot springs, you said you would never let me face shame again. Luke looked at her. I am leaving to prevent your shame. No. Ayana walked up to him. She grabbed the bridle of his horse, forcing the animal to stand still. You are leaving because it is easier to run than to stay and build something new. You said you would not let me face the shame of things I did not choose. Well, I did not choose for you to leave. If you go now, you make me a widow of a love that never even began. Is that your honor? Luke looked down at her. Her face was fierce, beautiful, and terrifying. I'm a reminder of death. Ayana, you are a reminder that we survived, she cried. You are the scar. Luke, yes, but scars are tough. Scars hold the skin together. She let go of the bridle and stepped back. But go. If you want to run, run. But do not tell me it is for my sake. Tell the truth. Tell me you are afraid to be happy. Luke stared at her. The wind whistled through the canyon, carrying the scent of the sage. He looked at the south road, leading to oblivion. He looked at Ayana, standing firm as a mountain. He slowly took his foot out of the stirrup. I cannot stay in the village, Luke said quietly. It is too soon. The people need time to mourn without seeing my face every morning. Ayana watched him, holding her breath. "But I will not go to Mexico," Luke said. He pointed toward the high peaks to the north, where the snow lingered even in summer. "There is an old trapper's line shack up on the north ridge. It is a day's ride, close enough to see the smoke from your fires, far enough that I am not a ghost at your feast." "You will stay there?" Ayana asked. "I will hunt," Luke said. "I will bring meat down to the edge of the camp. I will watch the passes, if Caldwell has friends, or if the army decides to come back. I will know first." He looked at her, and for the first time, a genuine, crooked smile touched his lips. And maybe, sometimes, a leader of the Apache might have business in the mountains, to check the water, or gather herbs. Ayana felt the knot in her chest loosen. It was not a perfect ending. It was not a fairy tale, but it was real. "The herbs grow best near the high shack," she said. "I might need to gather them often." "I suspect you might," Luke said. He did not kiss her. The village was watching, and there were lines they still had to navigate, but he reached out and took her hand. He squeezed it, a promise of iron and blood. "I am not going far." "Ayana," he said, "I am just moving to the perimeter." "Then guard it well. Scout," she said. Luke swung into the saddle. He tipped his hat to her, wheeled the roan gelding around, and rode not south, but north. He rode toward the mountains that loomed over the valley, a sentinel taking his post. Ayana watched him until he was just a speck against the granite cliffs. Then she bent down and began to pick up the spilled corn. Kernel by golden kernel. She had a tribe to feed, and a future to build. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would not be building it alone. The Arizona autumn arrived not with a whisper, but with a sigh of relief. The relentless heat that had baked the territory for months finally broke, giving way to the monsoon rains. The water fell in sheets, turning the dry riverbeds into rushing torrents and washing the red dust from the face of the world. When the clouds finally parted, the Dragoon Valley had transformed, where there had been only rock and sagebrush. A carpet of vibrant green grass now stretched toward the horizon, dotted with the yellow blooms of wildflowers. The Apache village had changed too. The temporary wickiups of willow and hide were slowly being replaced by more permanent structures of adobe brick, a technique borrowed from the Pueblo peoples to the north and adapted for the valley. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, no longer the black smoke of destruction, but the white, fragrant smoke of hearth fires cooking evening meals. Ayana stood in the center of the village, watching a group of children gathered under the shade of a large oak tree. A young white woman, a teacher sent from the east at the request of Marshal Reyes, was holding up a slate board. "Apple," the teacher said clearly. "A is for apple. A is for apple," the children repeated in chorus, their voices bright and unburdened by the shadows of the past summer. Ayana smiled, though her eyes remained watchful. She wore a dress that was a blend of two worlds. The cut was high-collared and practical like a settler woman's, but the material was soft buckskin, embroidered with the sacred geometric patterns of her clan. "They learn fast, Miss Nantan," a voice said. Ayana turned to see Agent Harrison approaching. He was the new Indian agent, a Quaker with a round, kind face and a belief in honesty that confused the local traders as much as it delighted the Apache. "They have to, Mr. Harrison," Ayana replied. "Words are the new weapons. If they do not know how to read the treaties, they will sign away the sky." "You have a cynical soul for one so young," Harrison noted gently, adjusting his spectacles. "I have a realistic soul," Ayana corrected him. "And speaking of reality, have you reviewed the proposal for the cattle exchange? We have 20 heads of horses ready to trade for the winter breeding stock." "I have," Harrison nodded. "The price you negotiated with the ranchers in Tucson is aggressive." "It is fair," Ayana said firmly. "My father gave away horses to keep the peace. I sell them to build a future. We are not beggars. Mr. Harrison, we are partners." She walked away, her head held high. In the months since the trial, Ayana had become the bridge between the valley and the town, The townsfolk called her Miss Nantan, a title that carried both the respect due her father and the acknowledgement of her own steel. She moved between the council fires and the dusty offices of the trading post, translating not just language, but intent. She was the loom upon which the frayed edges of two cultures were being tentatively woven together. But a bridge carries a heavy weight. Later that week, Ayanna rode to the way station to meet with Tess McGraw and Marshal Reyes. The way station was bustling with travelers heading west, but Tess cleared a table in the back room for them. "The railroad surveyors are back," Reyes said, pouring coffee. "But they are staying strictly to the southern pass. They know better than to set foot in the valley now." "Good," Ayanna said. "Let the iron horse run where it will, as long as it does not eat our grass." "There is another matter," Tess said, leaning forward. "The hot springs, the spirit's breath." Ayanna stiffened. "That is sacred ground." "It is also a gold mine," Tess said bluntly, though her eyes were kind. "Travelers come through here aching from the saddle, riddled with rheumatism and trail dust. They would pay $1 for an hour in those waters." "You want to sell our spirits?" Ayanna asked, her voice cooling. "No," Reyes interjected. "We want to sell a service. Look, Ayanna, the government rations are a stopgap. Next year, Congress might change its mind. You need an economy that does not depend on Washington. If we build a bathhouse, a proper one, decent and clean, we can split the profits. 50% to the tribe, 50% to the maintenance fund." Ayanna looked into her coffee cup. She thought of the steam rising from the pools. She thought of Luke standing in the water that had washed away his sins and her shame. "Not just water," Ayanna said slowly. "Healing." Tess raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The water soothes the skin," Ayanna said, her mind racing. "But Apache herbs soothe the muscle and the spirit. If we do this, my people do not just clean the pools. We provide the medicine. We make the soaps from yucca root. We offer mud packs for the joints. We make it something they cannot find in San Francisco." Reyes smiled. "A spa, in the middle of the territory. A place of healing," Ayanna corrected. "In a place of war." "We will need a builder," Tess said. "Someone who knows how to pipe the water without ruining the flow. Someone who knows wood and stone." Ayanna looked out the window toward the distant, snow-capped peaks of the North Ridge. "I know a builder," she said softly. The climb to the North Ridge was steep, the air thinning until it tasted crisp and cold. Ayanna rode her pinto mare, the horse's breath puffing in white clouds. It had been 3 months since Luke Carver had ridden away to his self-imposed exile. She found him in a small clearing near the timberline. The cabin was rough, built of logs and mud, but the roof was tight and the woodpile was stacked with military precision. Luke was sitting on a stump, shaving a piece of ash wood with a draw knife. He wore a heavy flannel shirt and wool trousers. He had filled out since the battle. The hollow look of starvation was gone, replaced by the lean, hard muscle of a mountain man. He stopped working when he heard the hoofbeats. He did not reach for his rifle. He stood up, brushing the shavings from his lap, and waited. Ayanna reined in her horse and slid to the ground. She stood looking at him. His sleeve hid the scar on his arm, but she knew it was there. She knew every line of his face, every shadow in his eyes. "You look well, Scout," she said. "The air is good up here," Luke replied. His voice was quiet, steady. "And the neighbors are quiet." "The neighbors down below are noisy," Ayanna said. "They are building houses. They are learning to read. They are arguing about the price of beef." "That sounds like civilization," Luke said. A small smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I assume you are winning the arguments." "Mostly," Ayanna admitted. She walked closer to him. "But we have a new project, a bathhouse, at the springs." Luke's eyes darkened slightly. "The springs! We are going to share the water," Ayanna said. "We are going to turn it into a place where the white man pays to be healed by the Apache. It is a good joke. Don't you think?" Luke chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. "It is a brilliant joke. Who came up with it?" "Tess and the marshal, but I refined it," Ayanna said. We need a builder. Luke. We need someone who can divert the flow for the tubs without killing the source. We need someone who can build a roof that will not rot in the steam. Luke looked down at the piece of ash wood in his hand. There are carpenters in Tucson. I do not want a carpenter from Tucson, Ayanna said. I want you. Luke looked up, his gaze intense. Ayanna, we talked about this. I am the ghost. If you come back as a man who works. Ayanna cut him off. The elders respect work. If you build this for us, if you help us secure our future, you earn your place. Not with a gun, but with a hammer. And you, Luke asked. What about you if I am down there, sweating and working? What does that make us? Ayanna took a step forward, closing the distance between them. I have thought about what you said, she said. About choosing between my people and you. About the shame. She looked him in the eye. I am not going to choose. Luke, I am going to walk the middle path. I am Ayanna Nantan, the leader of my people. And I am Ayanna, the woman who loves the stubborn white mule of a scout. Luke flinched as if she had struck him, but his eyes shone with a sudden, fierce hope. If you want to walk beside me, she continued, you have to accept that I do not belong to you. I belong to the valley, but my heart can have a tenant. Luke dropped the wood. He reached out and took her hands. His calloused thumbs brushed over her knuckles. A tenant, he repeated. With a lease. A long lease, Ayanna whispered. Renewable every day, provided you do not act like a fool. Luke pulled her toward him. He did not kiss her. Not yet. He just held her hands against his chest, letting her feel the steady beat of his heart. I will build your bathhouse, Luke said. I will build it so strong that 100 years from now, they will still be coming to wash away their dust. Luke returned to the valley the next day. He did not ride in with fanfare. He rode to the edge of the village, set up a tent near the river, and went to work. He worked from dawn until dusk. He hauled stone from the riverbed. He cut cedar logs from the high ridges. He designed a system of wooden flumes that channeled the hot water into 3 separate pools, cooling it slightly so it was bearable, while leaving the main spring untouched and sacred. The village watched him. At first, they were wary, but they saw him sweating. They saw him pause to help an old woman carry water. They saw him fixing a broken wagon wheel for a young mother without being asked. Respect is a slow-growing plant, but it has deep roots. One evening, as Luke was sanding a cedar plank for the benches, a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Kohana. The war chief looked impressive. He wore a shirt of bleached muslin and trousers, a concession to the new times, but his hair was still long, bound with red cloth. Kohana watched Luke work for a long moment. The wood is smooth. Kohana said, Splinters are bad for business. Luke replied, not stopping. Kohana reached into his belt and pulled out a knife. It was a beautiful thing. The handle carved from deer antler. The blade forged from good steel. He held it out, handle first. Luke stopped sanding. He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers. He looked at the knife, then at Kohana. I have a knife, Luke said cautiously. This is not a weapon for war. Kohana said, It is a skinning knife, for the hunt. A man cannot feed his family if he cannot dress the game. Luke understood. In the Apache way, providing food was the ultimate duty of a husband, a partner. Kohana was acknowledging him. Not as a friend, perhaps, but as a man who had a right to be there. I will use it well, Luke said, taking the knife. See what you do. Kohana said. He looked toward the village, where Ayanna was conducting a meeting. The wind changes, white man. Sometimes it blows cold, sometimes hot. As long as you stand with us when it blows, you can stay. I am not going anywhere, Luke said. Kohana nodded once, satisfied, and walked away. 2 months later, the bathhouse was finished. It was a structure of simple beauty. Low stone walls enclosed 3 large pools, a roof of cedar shingles, open at the sides to let the steam escape, protected the bathers from the sun and rain. Woven blankets hung as partitions, creating privacy. It was late afternoon. The sign, Dragoon Springs Healing Waters, swung gently in the breeze. The first customers, a group of miners from Tombstone, had come and gone, leaving behind silver dollars and praise for the miracle water. Luke stayed behind to check the flumes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in riots of orange and violet. The steam from the water turned the light into a golden haze. He stripped off his shirt and boots, tired to his bones. The water in the private rear pool reserved for the staff was inviting. He slid into the heat, groaning as the mineral warmth penetrated his aching back. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the smooth stone rim. He was at peace, for the first time in 5 years. The ghosts of the past were silent. He heard the soft scuff of a moccasin on a stone. He opened his eyes. Ayanna stood at the entrance to the partition. She wore a simple cotton shift. Her hair had grown out enough to tuck behind her ears. She held a towel in her hand. Luke sat up, his instinct to cover himself kicking in. He reached for the towel on the rim. "Don't," Ayanna said. She dropped her own towel. She walked toward the steps of the pool. She did not look away. She did not blush. Her eyes were steady, warm, and full of a quiet certainty. "Ayanna," Luke said, his voice rough. "Someone might come." "The door is barred," she said. She stepped into the water. "And I am not someone. I am the one who chose." She waded through the water until she stood in front of him. The steam swirled around them, a veil of privacy woven by the earth itself. Luke looked at her. He saw the woman who had held a rifle to his chest. He saw the woman who had saved his life in the snow. He saw the leader who had stared down a colonel. "The first time," Ayanna whispered, reaching out to touch the water on his chest. "I ran away. I was afraid of what you would think. I was afraid of the shame." She moved closer, her legs brushing against his. "This time," she said, smiling, "I walked in because I know what I want. There is no shame between two people who speak the truth to each other." Luke felt a lump form in his throat. He reached out and cupped her face. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "I promised you," he whispered. "I promised I would never let you feel ashamed of things you did not choose. And now I am choosing," Ayanna said. "So what is your promise now?" "Luke Carver." Luke pulled her into his arms. Skin met skin, warm and slick with the healing water. It was not a desperate embrace like the one in the cabin. It was a homecoming. "I promise," Luke said, his voice thick with emotion, "that whatever you choose, I will stand beside you. If the world calls it crazy, I will be crazy with you. If the world tries to break you, I will be the rock you lean on." He kissed her. It was a slow, deep kiss, tasting of steam and sulfur and sweet. Impossible victory. In that kiss, the last of the barriers dissolved. They were no longer White Scouts and Apache daughters. They were just Luke and Ayanna, floating in the warm heart of a harsh land. 6 months later, the bathhouse was a success beyond anyone's reckoning. Carriages from as far as Tucson lined the road. Tess McGraw ran to the front desk with an iron fist and a charming smile. Apache women sold baskets of yucca soap and jars of healing salve faster than they could make them. Ayanna stood on the high ridge overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cornfields that were tall and green. The sound of children laughing, Apache children and white settler children splashing together in the overflow creek, drifted up on the wind. It was not a paradise. It was still the West. There were still droughts. There were still men who looked at them with hate. But they were standing. They were thriving. Luke walked up the trail behind her. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. He had been expanding the roof of the main building. He stood beside her, looking out at the valley they had saved. "It is a good view," Luke said. "It is a view of tomorrow," Ayanna replied. She placed her hand on her stomach. It was a subtle gesture, barely noticeable, but Luke saw it. He went still. He looked at her hand, then at her face. Ayanna turned to him, her eyes shining with a secret light. "A new generation," she whispered. "One that belongs to both worlds." Luke did not speak. He could not. The man who had once believed he brought only death was now looking at the vessel of new life. He reached out and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, scarred, and warm. "He will need a horse," Luke said, his voice trembling slightly. "A good one, maybe a roan." "Or she," Ayanna smiled. "We'll need a pony that is as fast as the wind." "We will find one," Luke said. He stepped closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Ayanna leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. Below them, the wind blew through the canyon. It carried the scent of wet earth, of burning pine, and of the sulfur springs. It was the scent of the wild, untamed west. But now, it was also the scent of home. The storms would come again. They knew that. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in fire and gold, Luke Carver and Ayanna Nantan stood together on the edge of the world, ready to face whatever came next, not with guns, but with love, loyalty, and the unshakable freedom of those who have walked through the fire and come out the other side. Thank you so much for listening to this story of the American West. I hope the journey of Luke and Ayanna touched your heart. Please leave a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to know how far this story has traveled. And if you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so more people can hear this story. Your support keeps the campfire burning.